We talk a lot about arts-based learning in this conference and in this project. I'd like to take a minute to first talk about what that actually means, and then to talk a little bit about our project, our objectives, what you can expect over the next day and a half, and then on from there. When we talk about arts-based learning, what we mean is the instrumental use of artistic skills, processes, and experiences as learning tools in non-artistic disciplines. My own career, my evolution, has been as an artist. I started out as a musician. I learned to read music before English. But although much of my life has been deeply involved with art very much for art's sake, I've also become both fascinated by and increasingly aware of the broad applicability of what we experience and what we can learn and how we can use those things in a wide range of human endeavor. And this project is an attempt to explore a very specific application of arts-based learning to science education in order to explore the ways that we can develop a country, a citizenry, a world where people are engaged by the sciences and with the sciences and with the things that are so critical to the choices that they'll be making throughout their lives, and then to begin to apply those specific skills to innovation in the workforce, innovation in the 21st century STEM workforce. The art of science learning in many ways grew out of the growing interest that the business world began to show in arts-based learning, going back almost 20 years now. The work that I did with Orpheus Chamber Orchestra and the Conductorless Orchestra as a model of high-performance teamwork was one of many extraordinary examples that we'll be talking about over the next couple of days. And as the use of the arts, and by that I mean theater and dance and filmmaking and poetry and visual arts, the use of them in business environments to foster communications across culture, to foster collaborative environments and flexible organizations, to strengthen critical thinking and bring creativity to the workplace. That actually, in a kind of subterranean way, began to spread, so that I think it was around 2003 when I did some surveying and some research and discovered that 400 of the Fortune 500 corporations were actually using, in one way or another, arts-based learning for those purposes, even if they couldn't and in most cases didn't identify as such. And so we began to look at that a little more seriously in a structured way, working with Americans for the Arts and the Development of Creativity Connection. Americans for the Arts partnered with the Conference Board and did research in two really very important reports, Ready to Work and Ready to Innovate, about 6 or 7 years ago. And what they revealed, or one of the things that they revealed, is this innovation gap, this tremendous disconnect between the skills that business leaders were identifying as absolutely critical to success in the 21st century and the way that those skills were developed in the people that were coming to them from colleges and universities. And that disconnect seemed clustered so much around these areas where arts-based learning was so powerfully relevant, around creative and critical thinking and collaboration and communication, all of these things. And not surprisingly, as it was attracting the interest of the business world, it also began to attract interest in the scientific community, and specifically at the National Science Foundation. And going back about 3 or 3.5 years ago, we did a symposium at the NSF, Todd Seiler, who you'll be meeting and experiencing through the metaforming process that he's developed this afternoon, and I were joined by the choreographer Liz Lerman, and we spent a few hours at the NSF talking, but really also getting people to roll up their sleeves and be involved in arts-based work, and to explore the relevance of that to the issues of innovation and STEM education. And increasingly, as we focused on this, we also became aware that as powerfully important as these things are, that there are also certain barriers that exist that need to be dealt with if we're to ultimately achieve a broader kind of acceptance and engagement with the arts and science. And what those boil down to is, first of all, we need a community. We need a group of people and a way for those people to communicate with one another, and a language for them to use, and a frame of reference to think and talk together about the problem and the possibilities. We need evidence that arts-based learning actually works. I don't need evidence personally because I've spent much of my life working with it. And that's true of many other people. But on the other hand, policymakers, investors, decision makers do need evidence, and we need to find ways to address that need. And we need an agenda. We need an action agenda. That means for the practitioners, the people that are doing this, they need resources to work with. And for the decision makers, they need to understand how they can actually, in practical terms, advance this agenda. What they'll need to do and how they can do it, how that can have impact. We need to hear from them what they need in order to be ready to do those things. So we developed the Art of Science Learning as a project to address precisely those questions. Our objectives are twofold. First, we want to spark the formation of this community. I'm just so delighted to see everyone here today. It's really kind of extraordinary. This is the third and culminating of our conferences. In each city, we've had about 141 people attend, and I believe our count this morning is 141. So I'm not sure what that means, but, and what's really remarkable is that we have here people who've identified themselves as scientists and artists and teachers and museum professionals and business leaders and policymakers and researchers and academics, and many people who've identified themselves as 2, 3, 4, or even 6 of those things. And that's a wonderful point of departure. So we've brought these people together, we've brought you together in here and with your peers and colleagues in Washington and in Chicago, and we'll be working in various ways beyond this conference to help knit the three together and to help create a platform so that this community can find its own life, its own purposes, its own trajectories into the future, because there's an exciting amount of interconnection and learning that's being unleashed in these conferences. But that community building aspect is only one of our objectives. The second of our objectives is to try to advance this field and drive things forward in some very specific trajectories. There are 3 of them: educational practice, research, and workforce development. With research, what we're really trying to do is to bring people together to consider the questions of what it is that we feel can be measured. How can we measure it? How can we actually prove and document specific outcomes so that we can say with absolute certainty, yes, we can prove that arts-based learning can do this and can do that, and those things are relevant to a 21st century workforce. Will foster and advance scientific literacy and engagement with the sciences, these critical objectives. So what will grow out of these conferences in the post-conference period is a research agenda. The NSF has already told us that they're extremely interested in the evolution of that agenda, and they understand that we're coming back and have agreed to give very, very fast consideration to proposal to then actually implement some of these studies, so that hopefully, with careful design and effective follow-through, we'll be able to, in a relatively short period of time, years rather than decades, be able to actually document the impact of arts-based learning. This trajectory is bounded on either side. On the one side, it's bounded by educational practice. Educational practice, in our terms, means helping to create the resource of information that will help practitioners to work. When we were first developing this project, we did some focus groups in New York with science educators, both formal and informal, to find out a little bit about that we're working in one way or another with the arts and creativity in their science education, to find out how they felt about that and what they might need and so forth. And what happened was kind of extraordinary, because all of us in the room came from an arts background and had done a lot of arts education. And it's a well-known fact that you can't get 3 arts educators together in a room for more than about 15 minutes before somebody says, you know, every kid is born an artist until they have it knocked out of it at school. And here were all these science educators. Now, you know, every kid is born a scientist until they have it knocked out of it at school. So we figured, okay, there's something here to talk about. So what we really want to do is to help provide the resources that will help the field grow and advance, and will help people apply it in their own communities. And at the same time, that knowledge is a reservoir of opportunities for research, and so we hope to identify research opportunities there. Bounded on the other side by workforce development. We're going to be talking a lot in this conference about the STEM to STEAM movement, which in some ways was born and has taken such strength here in this community, which is a fantastic thing. What we want to do is with the workforce development trajectory in this project to now go beyond identifying the importance of STEM to STEAM and to talk in terms of actionable agendas. What can the public sector do and what does it need to do? What does the private sector need to do in very specific terms on a policy level in order to move this forward, and what in turn do they need in order to decide to do that? So obviously that work will help clarify for the research trajectory what it is that we need to measure. So that, broadly speaking, is what we're up to with the Art of Science Learning conferences, to spark a community and to begin the work in these very specific deliverables.